afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining us for this afternoon's session. Firstly, I'll introduce myself. My name's Tony Longbone. I'm a member of the WE Student Nurses team. I've got a real passion about dementia, and I'm really happy that we've managed to get everybody here today to join us for the session. Well, I have to remind everybody that we're bound by data protection laws, so please be mindful of any information that you're sharing in the chat function, or anything that you may be, any stories you may be sharing within the session itself. There is opportunity to interact with the panelists throughout the session. We've got the chat function. If you just make a note of that, I'm just going to drop a message in there. If you all want to just drop a note in there, introduce yourself, let us know where you're joining the session from, and then through the session, we'll be taking any questions from you if they pop up while each of the guests are speaking, and then we'll put them to the panel one by one. Right. Introducing our guests today, we've got Tommy Whitelaw. He's the project lead for Carers Voices, Health and Social Care, Lyons, Scotland. He's also very passionate about speaking about dementia and speaking about kindness. We're very fortunate to have him join us today. Secondly, we've got Victoria Lyons. Victoria is a senior consultant admiral nurse, and she's been working in the dementia field for about 20 years in a variety of roles. Victoria holds a master's in health and social care leadership. It is also course social care. And finally, we've got Fiona. She's joining us from the University of Derby. She's passionate about making a difference in dementia care. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hand over to each of the panel members. They're going to tell you a bit about them, a little bit of their story, and then we'll go into the questions from there. So first, I'm going to hand over to Tommy.
Hi, Tony, and thank you for the opportunity to take part today, and to other colleagues on the webinar, and to everyone who's participated today. I'm just going to start off with a couple of little things. Tony's given an introduction to my role. I just want to set the scene a little bit about today on World Alzheimer's Day. So my name's Tommy Whitelaw, and I was a full-time carer for my kind and beautiful and magnificent mum, Joan. My mum passed away. In fact, tomorrow is the anniversary of my mum passing away in 2012. And my mum had vascular dementia. And I cared for my mum at home from 2007 until my mum passed away. Can you pop on to the next slide, Tony? Yeah. I came back in 2007 to visit my mum, and stayed at home for the next 6 years as my mum was diagnosed with vascular dementia. And we became quite isolated from the lives we used to know. So people who used to phone suddenly stopped phoning, and people who used to come in for a wee cup of tea stopped coming in for a cup of tea. And there was two of us becoming lost, lonely and scared. Within the next 5 years, things changed very dramatically for us. Within 5 years, my mum was no longer able to speak, no longer able to walk, no longer able to recognise her son sleeping on her bedroom floor, so I could hold her hand if she gets scared in the middle of the night. And every time those changes happened, as a family, it left us on our knees. And one of the things I'd kept waking up each morning thinking, do you know what, I've got no clue what I'm doing here, Mum. No clue how to do this. How do we make it through today? That started off, one of the things was to write a wee blog to find out how other people managed. If I could find out how other people managed, maybe I could copy them and become a better son. And I made a wee promise on that blog that I would do a walk around Scotland to try and collect stories. And people started writing to me at that walk at first by the hundreds and now by the thousands. Scotland, from England, from Africa, from Australia, from America. And every single letter that I've received to this day has always been about love. It's about the day two people meet and set eyes upon each other for the first time and think, do you know what? I think I'm going to love you for the rest of my life. It's the love for a husband, a wife, a son, a daughter, a grandson, a granddaughter. All those incredible relationships each one of you brought with you to this webinar today. Because I think each one of you here today is unique. I think each one of you here today is remarkable. And I certainly think each one of you is beautiful. And your story matters and my story matters. But the other thing that stood out in these letters was the words loneliness, isolation, and understanding, and lack of understanding. Can you flip to the next slide, please, Tony? And the thing that made them beautiful letters to read, sometimes I'd read them and think, do you know what? I'm so glad you met that nurse today. I'm so glad it was that nurse that stood by your bed in that hospital or care home or in your front room. And as a nursing student, no matter what your role is and no matter what you do out in placement or when you graduate, firstly, you have the skill and the knowledge and the determination. But more importantly, each one of you has the potential and the opportunity to transform people's lives and their experiences. I mean, what an incredible gift you have. What a beautiful and remarkable role you play. The people in this webinar make up the most valuable professions we've ever created. And the reason they become beautiful professions is because it's people like you that make them so. But also make a difference was in my own personal story. I came back to visit my mum in 2007, and as I said, within 5 years, my mum was no longer able to walk or speak or recognise her son. And I got up one morning and my mum was doubly incontinent and I really didn't know what to do. The first thing I knew was that my mum should not sit in that bed like that for 1 second. No person, whether in a hospital or a care home or being cared for by their own son, should be allowed that. The standard that we walk past is the standard we all accept. The standard that we walk past is a standard we've just promoted. And the only thing I could think of doing was if I got the bath and I filled it up with enough bubbles, I could wash my mum and get her back to her best and not see any of the bits I was touching. And I got my mum's favourite shampoo that day because I wanted my mum's hair to smell beautiful. And I knew inside my heart that if my mum could have reached out for the shampoo she'd been lobbing in her shopping basket for about 40 years, she'd have reached for it. I got my mum out of the bath and sat in her sitting room in despair. Am I doing the right thing? Am I hurting my mum? If my mum could speak, what would she say to me today? I phoned up to try and get some help, but unfortunately we got put on a waiting list. Eventually a community nurse came out to visit us and I knew she was coming at 1 o'clock on the Wednesday. I thought, I'll get my mum in the bath at 12:30. I want my mum to be beautiful as that nurse comes in this door today. I want everybody who ever meets my mum to meet her at her best. I also wanted, as that nurse leaned over to undress my mum to examine her, that she would smell the shampoo and she would smell my mum's beautiful hair. And she would think to herself, Joan, every time I'm by your bedside, your hair must smell beautiful. And every time before I leave your bedside, your hair must smell beautiful. I wanted to set a standard with support and encouragement from people like you we could achieve for the last few months of my mum's life. And while I was bathing my mum, the door went. It was a nurse. She'd arrived early, and I shouted downstairs, the door's opened. He's just come up the stairs. And as I heard her coming up the stairs, I started crying harder than I've ever cried in my life before. I just needed one person in the world to notice that we were falling apart. She came walking in her bathroom and at first never said a word. She just put her arms around my shoulders and whispered in my ear that she thought I was doing a great job of caring for my mum. And my heart felt stronger the minute she said it. She then knelt down and introduced herself to my mum, and she showed me how to lift my mum. She showed me how to wash my mum. And then she showed me how to dry my mum like a lady. Because I'm sure my mum always dried herself like a lady, and she could do it by herself. She then said, I'm going to put this in place and that in place. I'm getting a bed with a wee button, and I'm going to do all these things. And 45 minutes later, as she was halfway down her stairs to leave, she said the greatest sentence I've ever heard in my life. She said, you know what, John and Thomas, I'm going to come here every Friday at 10 o'clock. I need to make sure you're both safe and you're both okay. The greatest sentence I've ever heard, because at that moment my mum mattered and I mattered and that nurse mattered. She's one of the reasons why I'm here to say that you can make a difference. She came up our stairs that day, we were falling apart and had nowhere to go. And after she walked back down them, we were back on a path and someone was going to help us along the way. And if I saw that nurse today, I'd run across the street and I'd shake her by the hand and I'd say, thank you for the care you gave to my mum. And if I saw her again tomorrow, I'd cross the street again and I'd put my arms around her and I'd say, thank you for caring for us. And I know many of you out in placement or work, but often people forget to say thank you. I forgot too often. In fact, it took me to reflect after my mum passed away and how to say thank you. So there's one thing I have to tell you about her that day, actually. She didn't even realise in what she was doing. She was just being a great nurse. Because that's what you great nurses do, isn't it? You meet people when they're at their most vulnerable and you help them understand. So I would just like to say a thank you to each and every one of you here who are at university for nursing or out in placement or practicing. Thank you for getting up yesterday to care for us. Thank you for getting back up to do it again today. And I think you're brave, but most of all, I think you're kind for doing it again tomorrow. And please be kind to you. If we're really going to be kind to others, it has to start with being kind to you. So I'll leave you with just one little thought. Please flip the conversations away from what's the matter with you to what matters to you. Flip the conversation from what's the matter with you to who matters to you. And our 5 must do with me steps are what matters to you and who matters to you. What kind of information do you need? Nothing about me without me. And if we can embed them as a template in our conversations, we design services that are really meaningful to each individual. So thank you for the opportunity to share a very short part of our experience today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. Brilliant as ever. And you've had me welling up as ever. Well, right, okay, we're going to move straight on just to keep everything flowing. So now I'm going to introduce Victoria Lyons, Senior Consultant Admiral Nurse with Dementia UK. Over to you, Victoria.
Thank you, and nice to meet you all. How to follow Tommy? Wow. Can I start off by just echoing a few of Tommy's words, because I think there's so much in what he said that's so important about that feeling about being glad to meet that nurse and the difference that one nurse can make throughout somebody's care journey in their life. And actually, the other quote that Tommy shared earlier on was actually the standard you walk by is the standard you accept. And what's funny, and Tommy doesn't know this, we've known each other for a number of years, is I've actually got that on my office wall just off camera. And that's been a bit of a kind of, on Twitter, that used to be my sort of strap line, if you like, and I changed it a while ago on Twitter. Just, wow, thank you for sharing everything you did, Tommy. About me, I'm the Senior Consultant Admiral Nurse at Dementia UK. I've been an Admiral Nurse for 20 years. Other things that I think people need to know about me is that I come from a family of nurses. There's a number of nurses and professional carers in my family, and people who have worked with MenCap and supporting people with learning disabilities in my family. Also come from a family where we've had 3 members of the family living with dementia. So, you know, quite a large number of people, all with different stories and journeys, and it means that quite a number of members of my family, or my mum in 2 cases was the main carer for families living with dementia, for my family when we had dementia in the family. I'm very passionate, therefore, about nursing and dementia and learning disabilities. They're naturally the kind of topics that I've become passionate about over the years, because they're the ones that have impacted on me. And I think one of the things that I'm incredibly keen on is that every nurse out there, wherever they work, recognises the impact that dementia might have on them as a professional and also on them personally. So I want to do a bit of an experiment here. I think we've got 15 people on the webinar today. If you could just type in the chat box the answer to this question: do all nurses need to have an understanding or clinical knowledge of dementia? What do you think? So if you could just open chat and say yay or nay to that. Good, thank you, Natalie. 100% they do. Good. It's always good when someone responds. Thank you, Claire. Yes. Yep. Yep. Can see lots of yeses, which is good. But of course, if you want to say no, do as well. It's fine. Fabulous. I mean, that's good, and I'm pleased to hear that. And I think, given the people who you've tuned into this webinar, you knew what it was about. I guess you're interested already, and you're probably aware of actually why we do need to have that, and why we do need to have that knowledge. It might surprise you that sometimes when you're out there talking to people, they actually turn around and say, no, I don't think we do. We don't work in that field. We don't support people with dementia. We don't meet people with dementia. And some of what I wanted to do today was just explore with you a little bit some of the around that, and actually where people with dementia might be, and why does every nurse need to have a little bit of understanding and knowledge about dementia. So if we could do the next slide, please. I'm hoping this slide works. Oh, it does. Okay, that's good. This was me throwing lots of pictures that I found on Google together in a slide. So these pictures are trying to represent different ways, different places that nurses might work. Obviously, if we kind of work through them, if you think sort of top left, this is an acute hospital. I don't actually know which acute hospital, it was just on Google Images. And actually, you know, one of the things that a while ago, and still happens now, you have dementia wards, you have, you know, older people's wards, where a number of people, be that 16, 20 people, however many people who have dementia, may get some treatment on that ward, may be sitting on that ward. But actually, what we know in reality is that a quarter of people in an acute hospital at any time will have dementia. So, you know, actually, it's they're everywhere. You know, it's not just good enough that your care is good enough, or your care meets the required standard on your dementia units. It has to be all the way across the hospital, all the way from porters through to whatever ward and unit within that hospital. And really, dementia has to be something that's seen as everybody's business. And I know in acute hospitals now there's much more emphasis on ensuring that staff, you know, do receive some training, and some areas it's mandatory, it's tier 1, tier 2 training across the whole hospital. There's been some great growth in terms of dementia champions networks, and, you know, various ways of connecting staff in acute hospitals so that that experience is better. However, we do know, when you look at the statistics, that people with dementia tend to stay in hospitals longer. They don't necessarily get the same levels of care, you know, and there's all sorts of other issues that go around, you know, diagnosis, is it delirium, the support, the how people are looked after, and the management of those patients. So there's still areas for improvement. The next picture along the sort of middle top picture is trying to represent children's nursing, and, you know, working with children, and actually, you know, the youngest person I've ever worked with was a child of 12, and his dad had young onset dementia. So that child absolutely needed support and guidance and help and understanding around his dad's dementia and what was going on. And actually nowadays in society, lots of children are looked after by their grandparents, parents working full time, grandparents doing after school care. You know, so you could also use that picture to represent school nurses and people who would get into contact with children in a regular basis through health professions. The next picture is a nurse who looks rather to me like she might be working in a GP's practice, and of course dementia is much more kind of managed under primary care, and you know that's where most people sit, and that's where the length of your journey will really be underneath the primary care services. So clearly, if you're going to work in a primary care setting, you're going to need to have some knowledge of dementia and supporting them. The bottom row down, if you look to the gentleman sitting on the left at the bottom row, this is a gentleman who's got Down syndrome, and you know, if we know the statistics around people with Down syndrome being more at risk of developing dementia as they grow older, but actually people with learning disability in general, they're more likely to experience dementia as they grow older. And there's numerous reasons for this, but it's something that, you know, in terms of that group of people, you know, sadly, there's still quite a bit of work to do around diagnostic processes, around baselining, around post and pre-diagnostic support, around kind of supporting people to live with that diagnosis, and support the people in their circle of support to enable them to live with that diagnosis and understand what's going on. And that's an area that I'm very involved in. The picture in the middle is a midwife, you know, somebody working with a lady about to give birth, and actually this picture is a personal story of mine that I years and years ago went to support the midwifery team at St Mary's Hospital in London, where they had a lady who was about to give birth, and the lady had young onset dementia, and the nurses were really concerned about what that might look like, and they didn't really feel they had the skills and the knowledge to support this lady and how that might work. And they sort of said to us they'd never worked with anybody with dementia before, and of course you might expect at that end of the scale you might not, but actually when you look at the numbers of people with young onset dementia, it's entirely possible that you might. The next picture that you'll see is domiciliary care. So it's a picture that I thought could represent what we kind of traditionally consider. So it could be a care home, it could be domiciliary care, you know, working with somebody in their own home. And of course, if you're going to work in that field, you expect that you will have to have a good degree of dementia knowledge and clinical understanding. So my whistle stop through that was to try and kind of waken everybody to the idea that wherever you work, whatever you're doing, you are going to be working with families living with dementia and people in the circle of support, someone living with dementia, or somebody living with dementia themselves, or a combination of all of those. And actually, you know, it kind of is our business to make sure that we've got the knowledge and the skills and the competence and the confidence to work with these people. And in actual fact, good dementia care to me is it's good care for anybody. You know, if you can take on board the skills that you need, if you think about what makes good dementia care, it might be things about clear communication, empathy, understanding, compassion, a willingness to walk with somebody rather than tell somebody what they need to do. And all of these skills are the skills that actually make a good nurse. So if I could just move on to my next slide. I couldn't not mention this slide because a lot of the words that are on here are words that that kind of feel to me what good dementia care could look like and should look like, and what are kind of essential skills for nurses. And actually, you know, things in 6 are very trendy at the moment. So my rule of 6 would be around care, compassion, competence, communication, courage, and commitment. And actually, you know, to be a good nurse, you really do need to embody all of these things, and you know, actually you need courage. And if we think back to what Tommy was saying earlier about the standard you walk by is the standard you accept, sometimes you need courage to step outside of that and say, actually, do you know what, I'm not sure, I need to challenge this. Is this good enough care? You know, is this the way that I would want my mum to be cared for, or, you know, whoever it is to be cared for? You know, and do take, you know, sort of push yourself forward if you feel you need to challenge these things. I remember as a student nurse kind of nearly failing an assessment because I did challenge and being told it wasn't my place to question what was going on. I had to just accept it, and I didn't, and actually it did escalate up into a bigger investigation about what was going on that ward. So, you know, don't ever accept things if you're not sure they're right, and do use courage if you need to. And again, when we talk about compassion, we do talk about intelligent kindness, and actually how that is central to how people perceive their care. And if you can embody that and be that nurse that people need to meet, and, you know, it really does make a difference. Can I see my next slide, please? I think it's my last one. So the last one I needed to just share with you, because obviously I'm an Admiral nurse, I'm a senior consultant Admiral nurse, and I wanted to just share with you today a resource that we've developed at Dementia UK, and I couldn't find a fancy way to embed the URL, but you've got the URL there at the top if you want to search for the course. But it is a course that's there that we've put together to kind of introduce nurses to actually, you know, what does good dementia care look like? You know, what do families want? What do people with dementia want? How might you work with families? What is the impact of a diagnosis of dementia? What impact does that have on families? And how do you support and sustain relationships going forward in the people you work with? And obviously we base everything on reflection and taking it into our learning and looking at the action that can come out at the end of it. It's a course that takes a little time to do. It's not a sort of sit down in an hour type of course. It's more like probably about an 8 hours dip in, dip out type of thing. But it's a free resource that we've made available because we really want every nurse out there to feel that they've got the right clinical knowledge and experience and expertise to be able to work with families and support them in the way that we would wish families to be supported. So that's the end of my slide. Do have a look at that. And I know we'll have question time later on as part of this presentation, but if anybody wants to ping me any separate questions, feel free to on Twitter or any other way. Thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you, Victoria. Lots of really useful information in there. And thanks for sharing the learning resources as well, because I'm sure they'll be helpful for people going forward. Right, okay, we're going to move on to our next panellist now. Can I introduce Fiona? She's a lecturer with the University of Derby, where I'm very fortunate to be studying at the moment. She's, I don't like to use the word spent long periods working in different healthcare settings, but she's got a lot of experience working in dementia and helping develop dementia services. Most recently taking up the role of lecturer with the university. So over to you, Fiona.
Thanks very much, Tony. It's really good to be here today. Yes, I have been working with people with dementia in various different roles for a number of years, and that started off when I did a placement on a pre-nursing course a long time ago, and I was fortunate enough to have a placement on a ward for people with dementia in an old mental hospital, and that changed the course of my career. I applied for what was known as SRN in those days, which is now the adult field of nursing, but that made me change my application to be a registered mental nurse. And when I qualified, I applied to go on the wards for people living with dementia, long stay wards. So that really did change my career, having that experience as a student. Then, because I wanted to go into education, things were very different at that time. I did go off to university, and I can see there's a nurse from York at the moment. That's where I went and did my psychology. Went on to do a master's, then a PhD, although not in dementia, because at the time there just wasn't the opportunities, but I know there are lots more opportunities now for people to do that. Then I went into academia for 14 years, And I was always passionate about the older people's side, so did lead on some modules around caring for older people's mental health. Got involved in some of the very early sequins as well, commissioning for quality and innovation when they came out in dementia. And then I went back to practice. I went back to practice for 5 years. So I worked in social care. And my last job, and this follows on from Victoria saying that nurses work in different areas, was in acute hospitals and acute trust as a specialist dementia nurse. So people that were coming into hospital because they were poorly, and like Victoria said, at least 25% of those beds would be occupied by people that were living with dementia as well. And then my current job, as you say, I've come back to education, and I really see my role as inspiring student nurses to think of dementia care as an amazing career choice and to go down that route. Like Tommy and Victoria, I've also got personal experience. I had an uncle who was possibly around about 15, 16 years since he passed away. So the dementia care that he received a number of years ago was not optimal. It was not the sort of care I would have wanted him to have experienced. So I can see both sides. I can see the professional side. I can also see the personal side. To me, dementia care is one of the most highly skilled areas of care. I've always maintained that. I think everybody who's living with dementia and their carers should have the support of an Admiral nurse. Unfortunately, at the moment, there are not enough Admiral nurses to go round. So I really echo conversation I had with Victoria recently about we should all be practicing to those standards and just getting the message out there about this is what Admiral nurses do, and we should really be at that standard as dementia specialist nurses. And one of the other lovely things I think from going back to practice is when I met my husband, he would not have considered care as a career choice, but when he saw me and how much I loved that aspect of working with people with dementia, he now works on patient transport in the ambulance service and absolutely loves when he gets to work with people with dementia. So I really would promote it as an amazing career choice. And thank you everybody for coming today. Really appreciate you being here. That's it from me. Thanks, Anthony.
Right, thank you very much, Fiona. It's been lovely to hear about your career journey and everything else. Right, okay, so we're moving on to the next stage of our event, shall we say. I've got a couple of questions that have come in from our attendees, so I'm going to work through those first, and there's a couple that have kind of cropped up through the day on Twitter on the We Student Nurses account as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the slides off so that we can see all the panel, and then we'll go from there. Right, okay, there we go. Right, first question is for you, Tommy. What would have made your caring experience easier? Can you recommend any good services that you have found in that time?
I think for me, one of the issues, well, some of the issues we had was that people were just seeing dementia and not seeing my mum. I started writing a blog one day about when did my mum become invisible to people, and I realised that I'd also become invisible as her son and her carer. So for me, one of the issues that I felt, what would have made a difference was at each point where we really needed support, where we would wake up one day and things we were able to do and achieve the day before, we were no longer able to do and achieve them. And it often took so long to get that message across and for maybe support to be put in place that by the time it happened, we had moved beyond that point. It took so long, we were now at the next place in our life. And that was the biggest struggle for me, was we kept having to go back to the beginning of the story, and we weren't at the beginning anymore. We were here where we are today. And I felt there was too much time wasted in amongst that. I think the other issue out there is there's a lot of good support out there, just a lot of people don't know about it. We have to be better at sharing the good stuff. and celebrating the good stuff and encouraging the good stuff, and take away the preciousness of it sometimes and share everything that's out there that can really help people. But for me, I just felt that each time we got to a certain place, it would take so long for that conversation to happen, that the time support was put in place where we're beyond that. And when it came in, it wasn't as the same kind of value it would have been if it happened at the right time. And I felt we were consistently a few months behind all the time.
Okay, thank you, Tommy. Next one, this one kind of goes to Fiona and Victoria, maybe, because this is more about the nursing side of things, I think. It just relates to a bit of a conversation that's been going on the account today. And I've been thinking really hard about how to word it. But I think it relates to how can we give nurses, probably in acute hospitals, in your general hospitals and that kind of thing, the confidence to engage with people that have got a dementia diagnosis, because some students have, how to put this, experienced some nurses maybe being a little bit more distant. That's a polite way of putting it, I think. What do you think can be done?
Okay, I mean, I think some of it starts in looking at, obviously, the training offer, what knowledge people have in the first place. So looking at, you know, making things mandatory training. I know we're doing this on an e-platform, but there's some areas where, you know, in certain trusts it's an e-learning hour-long tick box, and does that actually really translate to change, or is it just, you know, I'm never a fan of learning just for the sake of saying, you can say I've learned it. It's got to lead to action, it's got to lead to a change, to a difference. And so to me, I would say the basic has to be right to start with. And then it's around kind of, it goes back to those 6 C's, I think, in lots of ways. You know, if you can think about how you can approach things in a compassionate, caring way with you know, and not just rushing everything. And I get, if you're in an acute hospital, it's medically based, you've got certain tasks, you've got people who are acutely unwell and they're in the hospital for that reason. But actually, you know, if you want to do good quality dementia care, you can't necessarily do that in 15 minutes. You know, it's not about how do I as quickly as possible change this dressing and get on to the next thing. You know, and it's about engaging with people and communicating on a different level. So, which is a challenge if you're in a busy hospital. I get that. You know, and I spoke to acute hospital recently, where they were using lots of specialing costs, lots of one-to-one costs, because people with dementia were in the hospital, and they'd kind of fallen into a bit of a kind of trap place, in a way of, you know, going, oh, someone with dementia, we need someone to one-to-one them because that will keep them safe, and actually not looking at that person and deciding, do they need that? What do I know about that person? What's going on? How can I make sure they're pain-free? They've not got delirium, they've got nothing, you know, that's causing them to you know, to be, look at what's causing the behaviour rather than just go fix it with this. So there's lots to be done there. I don't know, but it has to start with leadership and a real want to ensure that the numbers of people in your hospital are receiving good care. And it's huge. If you're 600-bed hospital, you're talking about potentially 250 people in your hospital. You've got to make it right for them. Tommy, you're going to come in.
Yeah, it's just a couple of things. You were speaking about confidence there. I think no one should ever leave us feeling less confident about whether we're a student nurse with the support network that's there, or a patient or a carer, but no one should ever leave us feeling less confident about ourselves because of words or actions we've used. And just to go on about these really busy settings in acute hospitals, one of the problems there is that often we start listening with an intent to reply. And when we work in really busy settings, if your first intention is to reply to someone, it tells you you're not really listening. So be reflective, practice your listening skills. It's a really good tool. That often we do it because if I spend too much time listening to you, I'll be late for the next 14 people I have to visit. It's a false economy. And we get into a situation with listening with an intent to reply. We're deciding the answers really quickly. And we go back to confidence again. Every time we answer too quickly or jump in too quickly, we affect the confidence of someone who might be feeling quite vulnerable or scared. And every time that affects your confidence, like me, one day you wake up and think, I have nothing of value to say. I have nothing to say. And you stop speaking. And that's one of the foundations that lead into a crisis. So be a confidence maker, never a confidence breaker.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tommy.
I'd say time as well, invest in that time, and that was something that I was used to promote, that the time you spend maybe at the start of a shift, making somebody feel valued, not rushing that person, when you're doing some of the most personal aspects, can actually pay dividends later in the day. So when I worked in care homes as a trainer as well, that was something that I was always promoting, that, you know, just taking 30 seconds longer can actually make a massive difference to that person. Not rushing people, working at their pace. And I've put something on the chat as well, Tommy. I can remember you talking in Nottingham, and I don't know if you'd seen Above Your Mum's Bed challenging, so they labelled her. But you said, my mum was scared, and it was the way you said it. Your mum wasn't challenging, your mum was scared. And it's altering that rather than negative labelling. It's like, well, let's understand why she might be a little bit resistant, or why any person might be a little bit resistant. We're going to come and stab them. We're going to come and do this to them, without taking that time to just reassure in whatever way we can.
You know, that's why I'm so passionate about the What Matters to Me boards that we've been launching and working on, mainly in Scotland, but more spread across England now, because putting those words up like challenging and wears glasses was the only two things above my mum's bed, was challenging behaviour and wears glasses. And actually, if you change that language, if I say to you that someone's challenging and you've not met them, you'll go towards them with expectations of being challenged. If I say to you that someone in there is quite distressed, you'll approach that person to try and take away that distress. I mean, it's just language. So there's lots of good examples. I'd encourage you to have a look at whatmatterstoyou.scot and see some of the lovely case studies there by having a little What Matters to Me board. Because things that matter to you before an operation might not be the things that matter to you after you've had an operation. Things that matter to you to the day you're admitted to hospital might not be the same things that matter a week being into hospital. So have a wee look at whatmatterstoyou.scot.
Can I just jump on there as well and say, because the other thing that I always find really useful is about when thinking about life story and the information that you have about somebody. And I talk about this at numerous acute hospitals around the importance of actually getting to know the people you're working with, and exactly that, what matters to them. And if you think about the stuff we write in nursing notes, it's really boring. It's really dull, you know. Yeah. So let's make it person-centered. Let's make it something real, you know. And it's this. If you get to know the person, you'll know actually that, you know, I don't know, this lady really likes X. If I put on this piece of music, this is going to make her in a good mood. We're going to have a positive interaction. You know, she likes mucky jokes, which was my grandma. If you were struggling with my grandma on anything, if you told her a rude joke, she would literally be in stitches, and you could do whatever you needed to do. You could work through it because she'd find it really funny. And you know, and actually get to know the people you're working with. And that is hard if you're in a busy environment, but if you invest the time, it will save you time further down the line, and it'll actually get them out of hospital better, so it's better for the people, you know. So it just, all in all, if you invest that time in people, so it's a really good point, Fiona. And yeah, do use things like life story networks and collages, or the, you know, Matters to Me boards.
Just a really quick example of that in our local hospital, and I use it a lot in my longer talk just now. A lady who was living with dementia, and her niece was kind of keeping an eye on her, you know, popping in the morning before work and after work, and her niece was away for a 2-day course with her work, and she fell at the doorstep, and a neighbour called an ambulance and she was rushed to hospital. By the time she got through A&E to the ward, after about 2 hours of being in hospital, she was so distressed they had the sidebars up on the bed because they felt she might jump out or fall out the bed. After 3.5 hours, they had a healthcare assistant doing a one-to-one at a stool by the side of the bed. watching this lady. By the time they got in touch with her niece and she got back, she was miles away, a 2-day course. It was about 10 hours later. When she ran into the ward, she barely recognised her aunt in this hospital gown, and so distressed. She had changed how she looked. Everything looked different. And she was deep. And the first thing she said was, "Where's my aunt's rosary beads?" She's never got them out of her hand. And they looked all around, and in the drawer and the cabinet beside her where her clothes were was the rosary beads that her husband had given to her. So they took the rosary beads out of her drawer and put them in her hand. An hour and a half later, the sidebars were down in the bed. 2 hours later, the healthcare assistant was being a healthcare assistant, supporting lots of people. And the aunt was less distressed. And she put up on the board, what matters to my aunt is that she always has her rosary beads. She's never got them out of her hands. The flip side of that was being over-medicated. And if you want to look even deeper, might never have made it home again. So that's a simple little thing. And I do like the theory of life storybooks. I'm just not convinced anybody ever reads them. I don't think people pick up a 20-page story. Like, so by having it in a little board with what matters to me, with those little things like, I like to have my rosary beads. But it's a lovely case study on our website about that, about just putting the rosary beads back in that lady's hands. That's what mattered to her.
Mm. I do agree with you about the life story books, and I think providing, because again, you're right, sometimes they don't get read and they get turned into things that don't happen, and they have to go into the care plans, and that's the upside of it. We've got to make that feed into our care plans, feed into.
They become quite stagnant, don't
they? They do.
They're valuable, but they can become stagnant.
Yeah, they've got.
If you get something you can keep changing as your needs change and your day changes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've just had a quick look at the questions that have come in as well. So I thought I might there's a question there about early onset and whether it's on the rise. The answer to that question is it's always been a huge number. It's always been lots and lots of people are living with young onset dementia. We know at the moment that there's over 42,000. We get this figure of 42,000 kind of banded around as a kind of average on how many people might be living with this diagnosis. But we actually know that to get that diagnosis, it takes a lot longer. You can be talking years and years and years longer. And if it takes on average about 2 years to get a diagnosis anyway, if you've got young onset dementia, it's much more. We also know that people tend to have more rarer types of dementia. It's not always that it's kind of what we would call typical signs of dementia that you might first see. I've spoken to numerous families who've said things like they've been sent to marriage guidance counselling, they've been put on antidepressants, they've been sent all sorts of routes before someone actually decided it was a diagnosis. It was actually dementia that this person was living with. So I think whilst the number is tip of an iceberg, so we've got this 42,000, but you could probably times it by 3 underneath, and the stats. So it's just that we're getting better, or at least we were before COVID came along. God knows what's going on now, but we were getting better at actually making these diagnoses and actually recognising the needs of people with young onset dementia. And the other real growing trend, of course, as well, is in the learning disabilities world. And most people, if you think the average life expectancy of somebody with learning disabilities is about 65. So anybody who gets a dementia who's got a learning disability is going to be classed as being, of a young dementia type. So the numbers are only a fraction of the picture, and it's that tip of the iceberg, and there really is a lot of people who are currently living with young onset dementia that nobody has recognised, known about, or that diagnosis has not been made yet. So whilst I don't think the numbers are particularly on the rise, although when I look at some of the stuff that's going on in other countries and reliance on technology and how we're not using our brains and all sorts of things, it's slightly iffy. But I think we're just getting better at recognising and making that diagnosis. So I better jump, because I was just mindful that we don't run out of time. I'm
aware as well, there's a question coming actually on the chat. So topical considering everything that's going on in the last few months, but I'm wondering what we can do during COVID to help people. with dementia.
I mean,
be kind, be nice to people, connect with people in different ways. I think one of the things that COVID has done just now, if you take COVID away, most of us are living the way that most unpaid carers across the UK live, day by day, week by week, year by year. And we're all experiencing a little bit the life of an unpaid family carer, and many people living with dementia. If you take the COVID away, that's the existence of most people. So a bit of reflectiveness just now on how we're feeling and how that feels most days of every day, of every week, of every year for so many carers across the country.
Yeah, and I think for me, I would just add to that, but I think people with dementia have been the hardest hit group in terms of COVID, and their carers. If you look at the deaths and the numbers of people who died, and of course COVID has predominantly affected in terms of deaths older people. It's been incredibly hard, and actually the whole demographic of people living with dementia has shifted due to COVID. So you've got people who would have been just about coping and they're in their own homes or coping perfectly well in their own homes who are now in care homes, people who are potentially were in care homes who are now more advanced, and people who have been moved from acute hospitals into so it's completely shifted the whole demographic. And I think the other challenge for us as professionals or future professionals working in the field is that where at the moment, because services have been on hold in terms of diagnosis, and only the very sort of extreme cases have had diagnosis made, there's kind of this huge demand of people. So as services start to open back up, there's a huge amount of people waiting for a diagnosis, and actually what can happen then is the kind of quality of the diagnosis starts to slip because we try to meet the demand. So there's a bit of me kind of wanting to say, just hold on and be courageous and don't run for this. We used to be in this bizarre horror when I qualified, where you could just slap a diagnosis of dementia on anybody. Somebody 80 a bit confused in the hospital, oh, they've got dementia, and there it is, it's in their notes. And to get back to that, we won't, I hope. But we've really got to make sure that we don't kind of look at this huge demand of people and let the quality split, and and demand good diagnosis and good pre and post diagnostic support for families, because that's what you need when you get the diagnosis. You can't, and I'd hate to go back to a place where we just kind of willy-nilly chuck out dementia diagnosis, and actually I'm not even keen on diagnosis being done again on e-platforms. I think support can be done that way, but the idea of doing an assessment for somebody with dementia and over a screen, so there's stuff, and COVID has had a massive impact. I can see a question as well in the chat about the next placement. Somebody's asked about the next placement is on the dementia care home and how should they best prepare. Well, I guess the easiest thing for me to say is you should do our e-learning platform that we've got.
That's what I would have said as well, though. Do your e-learning.
Not mention that. Do the online learning, because that is, we've had really good feedback from nurses who've done that, and it's not just available for Admiral nurses. Anybody can do it. It's a resource that's there. The other thing I would read, I would learn, the other thing again that I always think is just put yourself in the shoes of the people you're supporting, and switch on that compassion, switch on that caringness, because actually, if you're able to do that and sort of walk a day in someone's shoes or an hour in someone's shoes, or whatever, and really think, how might this feel for that person and their family, that will sort of stand you in good stead in public preparation. Tommy?
Yeah, just I suppose a personal tip I would give you, I think, including the panel and everybody listening today, each one of you will have multiple love stories in your life. It will be a lover, a partner, a friend, your child, a sibling, a parent. And they're the people you love. You love them in different ways, but they're your love story. And the Milk of Human Kindness tells us that every time we hold the hands of someone we love, that our hearts synchronise. And we release these good chemicals, and it brings great value to our lives, and we feel safer and more secure. The world feels better. But the same study tells us that every time we hold the hands of someone who's feeling really scared and alone in the world, that our hearts also synchronize in a slightly different way from the people we love. But it brings great value to your life as the hand holder, and that person, you bring value to that person's life, and they know they're not alone in the world, that somebody cares about them. So holding hands isn't just for dance floors. Every day, whether physically or emotionally, we get an opportunity to hold somebody's hand. We have to think how we can do that. So I suppose before we finish, I'm going to throw in a wee thank you to each and every one of you today. Thank you for every hand you've ever held. And thank you for the hands you've still to hold. It makes an incredible difference to the lives of another human being, but it makes an incredible difference to your own life.
Thank you, Tommy. They're very, very poignant and very strong words. Okay, so it's come to that time. I can't believe that hour's gone so quickly, to be honest with you. I'd like to thank everybody that's taken the time to join us today and join in the conversation. There's been some really great questions come up. Really chuffed to see that. Nice to see that there's lots of passion still for dementia care and it's growing. I'd like to thank you, Tommy, for coming along and sharing your story and the story of your mom. Again, Victoria, I can't thank everybody that's joined the panel enough for me today because they've really made it special. And Victoria, thank you, and Fiona. It's been a real pleasure to work with you on this one.